Hello, my name's Oscar, and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm your host, he, him pronouns, and I am delighted to be joined by Stuart. Stuart, tell us a little bit about yourself, as if people don't already know.
Yeah, well, I'm wearing the hat, so
You're
maybe.
wearing the hat, yeah.
Although, that's something you could say. I'm wearing the hat.
We
People should
are
know
the
that.
Hat Brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, I am Stuart De Ville. The GDL is my baby, and yeah, and I do way too many things in game development at
Exactly.
this point.
Well, as you know, I am on a podquest to learn everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And in the light of, we just had a couple of weeks ago Pocket Gamer, and I think there's been a lot of change and activity going on in the space. I thought we'd talk a little bit about kind of futurism-y kind of aspects, particularly one thing that occurred to me during the Pocket Gamer event was a number of conversations related to the Digital Markets Act. So this is a new visitor there. This is a kind of legislation which I think came in last year, but hasn't been kind of fully enforced yet, which basically takes away this kind of stranglehold that platforms have about us being able to sell games through other channels. I mean, it's not quite as clear cut as that. We'll get into that, I'm sure. I don't want to get into the weeds in the intro. But one thing that's interesting from our point of view, as people who are working with smaller teams generally, I'd love to sort of get a sense from you. Are we starting to see not just the turmoil of the last year and a half or whatever, but actually something functionally interesting coming about, namely the way that the market operates reached a level of maturity, but now it's starting to potentially open into new areas. Do you think that we're about to see some interesting change, or is this just another red herring? What do you think?
I would hope we're going to see some some cool new stuff. Um, I don't know where we're going to see it. There's like you said, there's lots of like little things, like lots of little areas where things could change. I mean, and when it comes to like self-publishing and stuff, and trying to get make your own way through discovery, building your own community, um, finding your people for your game, finding your audience on social media, building that out. Um, that's all become it's kind of become more accessible,
Hmm.
but it also, as a developer, as a especially for like an indie studio, it just means that we've just been given more jobs.
Exactly that. And I think this is one of the things is that, in a space where historically we've been dependent on a platform or a publisher to provide us with distribution. So a developer's focus can be purely on making the best possible game. I think part of the difficulty of being able to get these other jobs is I think we suddenly realise that marketing is a skill. I can say that because I am a trained marketeer. I have letters after my name over this stuff,
Yeah.
and it still baffles me that people don't understand that there is a skill involved in promotion and marketing. But more than that, I think that an understanding of an engaging with an audience where they are, I think that's a really fundamental thing. So, from your point of view, I mean, I'll throw you an example. PC games grew faster than mobile games for the first time last year, at least according to certain measures.
Yeah.
I think that shows a phenomenal change in fortunes for what we have to think of as game teams. In your experience, the way you've been working, have you seen yourself shifting your choices, your patterns, your approaches to building a game, finding source of finance for those games, etc. I mean, what impact is this market change having on your choices?
I think it's definitely changing how I'm approaching social media. Like that's been the biggest change for me personally. Um, we quite some time ago actually, when Twitter was having its initial issues, should we say, we took the decision to leave, and since then we've seen the mass exodus of game developers doing the same thing. Um, and so Twitter kind of used to be like your key platform for finding an audience and promoting to an audience. Um, and then as that became less and less the case, we've all gone, well, let's do it on other platforms. But I think obviously the key platform for that is going to be TikTok.
Yep.
And even that might change, right? Blue Sky is probably a fairly solid competitor, but I think we saw the mass exodus of game developers. We haven't quite seen the same volume of audience, like of gamers, players.
Yeah, that's fair.
So whether or not that will be a thing is it's a whole other.
Yeah. I mean, I found Blue Sky really interesting, but I think the issue is at hand that there's been a massive loss of trust in audiences about communication and social media channels. And with so much going on in terms of the politics of the world at the moment, and the whole question about whose voice is authoritative or not. I think there's, and also a lot of people just wanting to get out of even having to think about that stuff.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting for me is that we're looking for. I think people are looking for other ways of engaging. And that's why, for me, it's still in terms of finding an individual I'm following, in terms of, the use of, YouTube streamers, whatever else. But even there's a lack of trust of the algorithm. So I've noticed personally that the traditional channels for promoting a game have almost collapsed in terms of growth. The only thing feels to still work is if you already have an existing community, or if you are able to sprout off of connections with other communities, as opposed to relying on platforms or paid acquisition. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, where do I start this? So quite a while back now, I think it was quite a while back now, it was Bossa Studios, right? Who had their own like launcher.
Yeah.
And then they used that as a launching storefront. And when that came about, I thought we were all going to be doing that. I thought that makes so much sense to me that you would, create a launcher for your game, so that when whoever bought your game, open up the launcher, you obviously are plugged into that, so that you can suggest other games that you make. That just made total sense to me. But we didn't see that, and I think we didn't see that because it's work. And you've got to build your own launcher. You've got to keep it updated. It can't be a boring thing. And as a game developer, the other platforms I think also saw like Steam saw that they could just always pander to that kind of stressful situation and say to us, look, don't worry about all that kind of stuff. We give you a platform to do that.
Yeah.
You could trust us to do this for you. You can trust us to help your game get discovered. The term that gets banded around kind of all the time now, and I do it a little bit myself when I'm talking to people, but when people want to support you, they say, you should just have to focus on the game. Let us do everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that has left us in this situation, especially with Steam as a platform, where if you don't know how to leverage discovery on Steam, then it's really hard for you to get discovered. And we've all now switched to relying on our social media outreach or like early Kickstarter programs. We all have other ways of letting our audience know that we exist. We don't rely on Steam as a platform to do that for us. So whether or not I think everyone at this point in a small studio is looking for building a community. We've seen community management become massive.
It's the lifeblood. It's genuinely the only. And again, I think so. I often make the argument that people look at live ops in the wrong way. To me, live ops is not a binary thing. It's not a case of you're either doing live ops or you're not. To me, it's a case of, even if you've got more than one game and you've got an audience of people and you want to be able to sell them another game, you've got to run your service as if it's live. You're having to create a consumer experience in some way and take your players with you. Now, that to me is all the same technique. It's just that you may not have the same level of kind of momentum or effort or packaging or function needed to deliver it. So, like I say, like all these things, they're a spectrum of behavior. Fire and forget, make a game, release it, forget about it. I don't think works at all.
No.
The only cases where it works are the survivor stories, and I think we indulge ourselves quite frequently on these one-off survivor stories where somebody gets the lucky moment, the zeitgeist, the explosion of interest somehow, and therefore they were geniuses.
Yeah, I was saying this recently that every time you see a talk or a panel discussion on like a game that was successful, there's a hindsight is 2020, survivor's bias. Like, look how big our game is. This is this point here. This is when it happened. This is what made our game a success. And it's always like, no. There's like a whole bunch of things. Like that might have been like a real like pivotal moment, or like it might have been like a cool moment. But there's a whole sea of things that had to happen in order for the game to be successful. And in amongst that is a pinch of luck.
No, I agree. And I think for me, the key thing is that I want to hear the survivor stories. Absolutely. I want to hear them, though, against all of the failure stories. Because I think we find our patterns in the gaps. You know, it's not in the survivor stories. It's not in the failures. It's in somewhere in between. What were the consistent things that we did? And I think this is why I'm so interested in this change. So the introduction of the Digital Markets Act, the kind of the way that platforms are having to change that way they operate, to me opens out an opportunity, because I think what we're seeing, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that the established rules that we've used to develop this market to the stage where mobile is all based on ad funding, and okay, it's not quite true, whatever, but you know, the Steam games are all going to be pay up front and with additional spend on buying some battle pass. All these kind of frameworks became, I think, as a factor of the dynamics of the stores. But if that dynamic is about to change, and I don't know that's the case, but if it is about to change, we have to work out where that's going for us. And I think with one of the issues I have at the moment is if you look at the UK advice, so the UK had a best practice advice, following on from the Age Appropriate Design Code, following on from advice for the Advertising Standards Authority in terms of monetization, most of which is sensible, but there's one piece in there that I find irritating, and that is that the developer is seen as responsible for knowing the customer. Now, why am I worried about that? It's because we don't have a customer that's not Apple or platform holder generally. You know, Apple, Google, Steam are our customers. They sell our content for us and pay us. We have no direct relationship with the player other than what the player does. So if we're responsible for knowing our customer, the people who have that information are the stores. So we're basically having to take extra information, which I believe makes players more vulnerable. But that all changes if we're having to do direct-to-customer sales, because we are actually then going to be the customer. So what I'm saying, for the reason I'm rambling a bit, is because I think this is an interesting space, because what I think we're entering into is a place where the barriers to entry for smaller teams are going to go up. At least professionalism, you know, stability, process elements are going to go up. And what's going to be interesting to me is seeing the tools and services and providers coming to take that pain away. Does that make any sense?
Do you think that they're going to?
I think so. Well, I mean, give me an example, right? So this is not So I was chatting to Archie from Stash GG the other day. Now, he's not trying to produce this solution, but if you look at what they're trying to do for direct to consumer for larger teams, they are pre-packaging a lot of the processes. If you look at Xzola, what are Xzola doing? They're creating tools and platforms so that you can make payment systems specifically in games. So there's a lot of tools and processes that are starting to emerge, ready to take advantage of a more platform agnostic model, I think. But I have a worry that we don't have discovery.
Hmm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So I mean, this is why I've always wondered if we could. I think because the other thing with being able to sell direct to customer is that we then do attempt to do this thing to the customer that the customers have clearly historically been trying to avoid, which is having to go to multiple places to get their entertainment. Um, you know, Netflix is where you go for watching your shows, or
Yep.
one of the three, Prime and maybe Apple TV. But yeah, so and when it comes to games, it's Steam,
Yep.
um, or it's your console devices storefront.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like your Nintendo Switch Play Store. Do they call it Play Store? Or on
Yeah.
mobile, obviously it's Google Play Store and then the Apple App Store. But yeah, whereas if we, as an industry, especially like for indies, I think it's going to be a hard sell for us if we were to go down the path of having our own launchers, as an example, and trying to have this closer relationship with our audience directly. Um, is that possible? Is that going to cut us off from a mass market, which is what we
Hmm.
have access to with a platform like Steam? But the thing is, even though we have access to a mass market on Steam, I don't see many developers, especially indie developers, who gain access to a mass audience
Hmm.
unless they have that lightning in the bottle, like luck of the
Hmm.
draw
Exactly.
moment, where they've created something that does have some mass appeal. And for most indies, that's not going to be the case.
No, and I think you really hit on something there. So I think what we're saying is that essentially, if you look at almost any media, there is some not necessarily control of the channel, but some focus of the audience eyeballs who are interested in a topic, film, games, whatever, and whether it's a movie or if it's a I don't know, a film for or a sort of Paramount TV. There are so many channels for visual content now
Mm.
that finding some way to get access to all those without the barrier of the subscription, because a subscription, having to subscribe to every single one is arduous and overbearing and too
Yeah.
much
Yeah,
more
it
work
feels
than it.
simple, but then
Yeah,
once you've subscribed to a bunch of things, you're like, oh, great, and now I've got to manage my subscription.
yeah.
Like,
And
yeah,
another one and another one.
yeah.
And and the risk we have is that we end up down that channel. But equally, I think you've also hit the nail on that if we are working with a team with an audience directly, we're not going to get scale, but what we can get is depth of engagement. So
Yeah.
we can have a much deeper, personal, rewarding relationship with a small number of people potentially. So this is a challenge, isn't it? What was for
It's
you?
kind of a case of like,
Yeah.
would that mean that you have sustainability? Like,
Yes.
if you've got this captivated audience, can you keep them captivated? What is the churn rate of it? Like, I
Mm.
think if you think about, because what we're basically saying is your audience is going to choose between Steam, where they have access to anything and all, and
Yeah.
like some random wonders. Um, Say if they're like they regularly play first-person shooters or whatever, but they come across Goat Simulator, which is something I've been talking about quite a lot recently. Then that's like a random find for them that they might try out, and then they go, do you know what? I love that random game, and then there's that
Yeah.
access. Whereas um, we've already seen that it's hard to pull a niche out in these areas. If you think about Shudder, which is basically like the horror net the top of horror.
Yeah. My son has subscribed to that.
Yeah. I think obviously they probably do have some form of following, but they're not. It's niche, so it hasn't been able to do big. It hasn't been able to take over Netflix or anything
But
like
it
that.
has loyalty.
Yeah.
And I mean, this to me comes down to some very basic principles of marketing. Again, classic guy going to talk about marketing because I've got the training. I think it's Kotler who talked about basically about niches and commodities. So having something which is bespoke adds value because of its scarcity and its quality versus something which is about commodity, in other words, volume and economy of scale being the important factor. And I think there is a place for all of these things. The question I think we don't know yet is, like you say, can you get sustainability? Probably not from one of them anymore, I suspect, but who knows? But the other one is, if you're having to run a relationship with people on many platforms, how do you get that kind of awareness? How do you get the scale you need to be able to have the momentum you need to be able to have the consistency of audience that you need? And at the same time, if you're an indie studio, you've got to learn about monetizing and finding ways to show value to players and customer relations. It's so much stuff. I mean, I worry that the ironic factor of this opening that potentially comes out of things like the Digital Markets Act, opening out possibilities like this, is that actually you make it harder for smaller teams. You're actually creating barriers to entry for development. And that to me means that we're potentially restricting creativity as well.
I don't know about that because as a creative, I always find that when there's constraints that either if there are no constraints, it's hard to create.
Well, that's kind of what I mean, is because if we're in a market where the constraints are being removed, which should be good, you've now got to get all of these ideas that we used to have a channel where your idea had a chance to be seen, however badly. But now we've also got to create the opportunity to be seen, if that makes any sense. So it's not just a case of we can make the idea and we can put it somewhere. We've got to create the idea and create somewhere for someone to see it and create an audience to go to the place where they see it.
Yeah.
So, and let's face it, indie games has been the lifeblood of innovation.
Yeah, I say that all the time.
Yeah,
the big studios. It's not a case of they don't want to innovate; they can't innovate. They can't tear their audience. Their massive audience loves what they make, and they can't take big. Well, we've seen it when they do take big risks. It tends not to pan out. Games die, and a whole bunch of people get laid off.
But also, when innovation happens, like live ops services and so on and so forth, it's harder for those bigger teams to take those risks, to learn those processes, because the loss of face to their organization for killing a game is so huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean that in a kind of like poor Sony or whatever for whatever what was the game that they closed recently? Anyway, there was a game they closed recently.
There's the one that I was thinking about, but I cannot think of the name of it because it died so quickly.
But the thing is, people say, "Well, it's the death of live ops game." No, it's the death of a live ops game.
Yeah.
And what was it? The audience chose it for it not to be a live ops game because they didn't want to play it.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, and so this is why I kind of I know I'm biased. I always come back to live ops. I know I do. I'm sorry, but I think to me is again back to this idea of it being a spectrum. I think increasingly as we see these market changes, we're going to have to learn more tools, which means that we're going to have less time to make the game. We're going to need more funding to make the game. At the same time as the funding is dried up. And I'm trying to help me, stop me from going into a downward spiral.
So I can tell you that we lost, what was it, like 10% of our funding,
Yeah.
like
Was
avenues
that all?
for
I thought it was more than that, but sure. Yeah.
it depends where you look and what whether you're talking about like PCs, Angels, like, but um, publishers mainly. Like we lost 10% of publishers, right, for sure.
Yeah.
And so, but we're seeing now that the investment space is starting to open
Hmm.
up again because
Oh, yes,
they
definitely.
still have to invest. They can't just stop investing, and they've been very cautious for a very long time.
Hmm.
And now they're going. Now is the time to start making those investments. Someone please give me something to invest in that makes sense. And so then it becomes our job to go, well, this, I'm pretty sure that what I'm making makes sense.
Hmm.
But again, that's more work for us. We have to have done our homework. We have to have done our research. It used to be that you didn't really have to do that. People would say, you don't need that data in your pitch deck because the publishers or investors will have done their own homework. But they want to know that you know. They want to
Exactly.
know that you understand what it is, the space that you're going into. Because otherwise, if you don't know, you could just build your game off into whatever the changes that you decide haven't got that North Star that they are going to also want to have. They're going to want to know that you have an idea of trends. So if you're making a cozy game, or if you're making a narrative game, like why are you making that? Like, are you seeing trends in the market that the audience for that is coming back round again, or like you were working on this and that that trend or thematic thing starts dying off. Um, there's like there are some themes that are evergreen ish, but even with that, um, you would need to know seasonally when is the time to be tapping into that. So like, is that when you're going to launch your game? If it's like a spooky game, you know that you want to be launching around Halloween.
Yeah.
Like this is all stuff that you now need to know in order for an investor of any kind
Hmm.
to kind of take interest, because
And to my
they're
mind, this
now
is
looking for that.
yeah, exactly. And to my mind, this is about the maturing of the market as much as
Mm-hmm.
it is anything else. However, I think where I'm going to be back to positive, Oscar. Um, so every time we've seen a new change of process, we've seen massive like change in who the major players can be, or at least big teams coming in and changing a lot. So for example, when we did mobile Java games, we saw teams like Macrospace and Digital Chocolate. Well, who was behind Macrospace and Digital Chocolate? Well, that was Christian Segazdari, Super Mega Evil Corp nowadays, and it was people like Ilkka Paninen, i.e. Supercell nowadays. So the people who spend time in the early days innovating often, not always, often end up. I know I'm at risk of talking about survivor stories here, but those folks are were great at understanding the trends that they went through and applying it. And I think they are good examples of people that we can not necessarily try and emulate the same scale, but to understand the process that they went through. They've gone through understanding. They started with looking at mobile Java. They adjusted to the necessities of the Facebook social game era. And then when Apple on iPhone comes out, and obviously Android to follow, they rapidly adapted those lessons into something powerful. And I think we're into this kind of change ahead of us personally. I think we're looking at something really interesting. We've been through the Apple Store with the 30% markup. Bear in mind, during the mobile Java era, I took 60% margin as the operator. I took 60%. Those are good old days. Sorry, no, joking. But hey, look, I'm not going to be shy about it. We were more revenue per user than any other operator in the world,
Yeah.
and that was because we gave it monkeys about games. And don't get me wrong, Supercell makes more money per month than the industry did as a whole. in the Java era. So don't mistake my enjoyment of the lessons we learned with the realities of how much cash was involved. But the reason why I think this is really interesting is because the fundamental shift between an operator doing it and an OEM doing it completely changed the model. What did they do that was different? Well, I was the gatekeeper. I paid for QA on every single game to make sure every game was going to be of the right level of quality.
Yeah.
Apple decided not to do any of that and let the market decide. And I have to admit it, Apple were right. Apple reduced the barriers to access at the same time as at that time reducing the revenue share that they took. And as we move into this new era where we're now seeing the market channels going to hopefully potentially going to change, at least to some extent, I think we'll end up, like you say, with these big lenses, which are the Apples and the Sonys or whatever else Steams, but also the ability to more directly service audiences. And I think it's not just about the percentage differences. To me, it's about the quality levels of service that we can offer. And I think people who adapt to that quickly, who stop caring so much about the device that you're using to play, apart from the ergonomics, and start instead thinking about you as a player. What do you want? When do you want to play my game? How do I make it so that my game is easy in the first game you think of? And there's more stuff you can get directly from me. I think they're the people who are going to really benefit from this change in marketplace. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it kind of depends, right? So, because on platforms like TikTok, people follow a creator,
Yeah.
and so you could potentially, if you had solid TikTok game, become or have content come out from not just the game that you make, but the games that you make from your studio. People get to know you as a studio. You've got some like quirky characteristic. Your games are always fun in a certain way. I think there's totally a way of being more like platform agnostic that way. Like it wouldn't matter where you are. People are going to go, I need to know where this content is. Tell me where it is. I want to play it. My friends are playing it on that platform. I don't have that platform, but I have this platform.
Yeah.
And I think that's doable. So maybe we don't need our own launchers. Maybe we just need our own strength in discovery. I mean, we're already seeing like there's a lot of freelance social media marketing teams now, and individuals. So yeah, but
to that point, to me, it's about building. So at the moment, our relationship with the player is behind this series of barriers. You've got the device front end, you've got the store itself, you've got the publisher, and you've got us. You know, I say I've been publisher, but you've got the creative. So they've got these layers between us, and I think increasingly what changes like this develop is a change in us, where we have to get closer to that player, and we can build a more intimate relationship with that player, and a hopefully more sustainable relationship with that player. Hopefully.
just depends like what would that look like? How do we even how do we shape that?
Well, you kind of hinted at it, I think. You know, I've got this TikTok campaign going on. I've got, maybe it's just I'm making content. You know, we're making podcasts for game developers because we just love game dev and we love talking to game devs about game dev. So we're trying to build a relationship with you folks out there listening to our prophetic nonsense, whatever you want to call it, because hopefully you share with us this passion for the joy of the making of a game, not just playing games. Playing games is great, but there's a joy independent of playing games around making games. To me, I'm also have that joy of distributing and connecting with players. I think, you know, for us to be able to really understand whether we're any good at this stuff is to see the response our audience give us. And to me, it's the same thing. You know, if we happen to put ourselves out there and we have our our content on TikTok. We go to a PAX. We dress up in our own cosplay. When we're connecting with people, that's a massively personal moment. The question has always been how to scale that. And I think if we are less restricted, I suspect we have more opportunities. But the problem I keep coming back to is that whilst I can say all this stuff, people want an easy ride of it. They want to know they can go to the one place that they just check in on. How many social platforms do you have on your phone right now?
4.
Yeah, I've probably got 6.
Maybe 5.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not counting Slack, so that would be a 7th. But
yeah, that was my thinking. Was that if we don't count Discord, then 4.
Yeah. Well, I at one stage when I looked at all the comms systems, not just social media, but comms systems I had on my phone, at one point I had 26. But if you think about it, these are things I talk about: WhatsApp and WeChat and Kakao and Telegram and all of those different platforms, because there was a point where I had to have connections with so many different people in so many different territories. There's so many different ways of chatting to each other.
Yeah,
I got rid of most of them. But what your friend prefers as a way of chatting is different from what you prefer as a way of chatting. And that's my fundamental problem, is that we're always splitting the audience at some level.
I think that definitely used to be the case more so when everyone was trying to find the options.
Oh, Snap? Anyone use Snap anymore?
I
quite liked Snap. I thought Snap was good.
Oh, Snapchat.
Snapchat, yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I never actually really got into Snapchat.
Yeah.
But I think this is the thing. Like we had the explosion of all of the apps, and that now there's, we've wandered through the graveyard, and what's left is the ones that we were gravitating towards for whatever reason. Whether it was just like they had the best marketing and so everyone stuck with that platform, or the platform actually was good. And there's still, I don't think anyone thought that Twitter was going to go away. I don't think anyone thought there was going to be any major problem with Twitter. But it seems to be going.
I mean, honestly, I cannot stand Twitter anymore. I have to have it still, because I don't. I still have I have a trouble because when I was at Unity, I had a relatively large audience, but not particularly engaged. And so I'm in this sort of dilemma of where I've got a more engaged audience on Blue Sky than I currently do on X, but then most of the people who I used to connect to on X is now on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
To your very point, game devs have moved over, but not necessarily Joe Public.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty happy that even before trouble was brewing on X Twitter, LinkedIn was like a fairly low key buzz for us.
I live on LinkedIn.
Yeah, right now, like every game developer that I know who is trying to do game dev seriously as a business is on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We've got to the point now where you share your QR code.
Yeah. The irony in some ways about that. No, exactly. The irony in some ways of that is the level of. So LinkedIn used to be a little bit less annoying because there was a professionalism to it. There was this is my career we're talking about. You're not going to spam me. But the level of AI generated spam invites
that's
I'm
a bit of a
getting
problem right now.
Yeah. And
I think that's going to stop though, because every time you see it, there's a comment on it that says, "Tell me your ChatGPT bot," without telling me you're a ChatGPT bot.
Yeah.
So I think people are going to learn pretty quickly that it's obvious. It's just so glaringly obvious.
So glaringly obvious.
When you have a genuine reaction to someone's content, like you can't really fake it. Like the way that you type, whatever the words that you choose in that moment, it's never a clean regurgitation of the content of the post.
No, exactly. What was
Yeah.
the classic one is I noticed the success that you've been having with your XYZ company, and I was super impressed, and I think you should talk about this completely unrelated item with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll try not to be so depressed about that.
I always wonder, like, what is like? There has to be some volume of hit rate with that stuff that makes it kind of potentially viable to some level. But
funny enough, I did used to know somebody who worked in spam, literally spam, and what they were saying, and again, completely despicable, but the not the person, but the approach,
yeah,
that was it's all about massive volumes, and when you can
yeah,
send millions of emails, it only takes a small percentage for them to turn around to be valuable.
yeah,
And it's almost like a sunk cost fallacy. It's like the scale that you send out isn't the important factor. It's the return numbers, the actual return numbers that matter. And so if you're using the AI thing, I kind of get it. But the problem I have is the same problem I have with a whole bunch of things like it's like the way that ads are being played with in the game industry right now. The extending the time and making you go and do it through a player, all that kind of stuff. It all makes you more likely to click on the ad, but it makes you more likely to leave the original game. And so and similarly, it's all very well having this spam stuff going on LinkedIn, but what it does is it leaves us all feeling less satisfied with the platform.
I always view it as if you're using that kind of technique, what you're basically doing is slinging out 1,000 scorpions,
Yeah,
and some of those scorpions are going to misfire, or the person's going to be immune to the poison, and they'll actually get the message. But for the rest of the people, you just stung them, and
yeah,
they associate that sting with you and your business,
yeah,
your company, whatever, or your service, whatever the hell it is you're trying to push. And
yeah,
so you've killed a potential future customer, someone who might have actually gone out when they were looking for your product or looking
yeah.
for a product that kind of which you sell. You would have popped up, and they wouldn't have this bad feeling about
Yeah.
you, and so you become an option.
You've burnt your brand, and you burnt the platform your brand's been built on.
And with huge volume.
Huge volumes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's to me it's almost a reflection of climate change. I mean, I'm not entirely serious, and then obviously climate change is much more serious. But if you
Mm.
think about the callous kind of behaviour of so many of the larger, particularly the oil producing companies. Oh, it's fine. We'll just make more money and it'll be all right. It won't affect us. Well,
Or we'll make enough money that
we'll make
we'll,
enough
we'll,
money. It's
we'll, be able,
fine.
we'll be able to afford to deal with the problems that come after.
Yes.
It's not a great way of
It's
thinking.
not. It's not. It's
Yeah.
not sustainable. Have you not read the Lorax? I mean, sorry.
Or
Just
seen the
go
movie
read the
now.
Lorax. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, so back to the point. So I suppose what we
It's the same thing for this discovery problem, right?
yeah,
If you want to get discovered, there's a right way and a wrong way.
yeah,
Like and yeah, if you're I think this is the thing that a lot of indie developers are probably worried about, and why they don't do it. This is why we don't see mass pickup of game devs on TikTok,
yeah,
because yes, you can quite easily right now create content. You can grab your iPhone; it's got a pretty good camera. Grab a cheap light, like I have here. You have there, and yeah, like we are now. You can just go out and create content. But the worry is that, like, what if your content doesn't resonate, or what if it's just too
yeah.
awkward and gawky, and what if people make fun of it, and then yeah, you kind of burn this reputation
Hmm.
ish like situation. Although I would actually say that's less likely.
Hmm.
If you feel like you're being awkward, you're probably actually just being genuine, and
Yeah,
people will see that you're just being you,
totally.
and you being you might be a bit awkward. But
And
also
isn't
the
that the
speed at
superpower?
which,
Isn't that the
yeah,
superpower of being an indie? You know, because if
hopefully,
because
yeah,
authenticity is where our content's coming from. If authenticity is where our marketing is coming from, where our promotion is coming from, where our connections with an audience is coming from, that is part of what makes us stand out and interesting to people. Now, sure, the question comes, does that audience care about what we have to say? Sure. But isn't our job to find where that audience is? And I suppose in some ways, maybe this is the heart of why I brought this whole conversation up in the first place. It's not, I don't particularly mind about the digital markets act and all the commercial stuff. What I think is important is I think we've had a very difficult 18 months. We're seeing a lot of the systems and structures creating more and more barriers for particularly smaller teams. But at the end of the day, the same solution is there, which is we find what audience is going to resonate with what we have to say. We make sure we know where they are, and we make it easy for them to find us and the content that we've got. That to me is the heart of all of what we're trying to pull off, isn't it?
yeah. But again, like the the problem that we have is understanding discoverability and how it works on whichever platform it works
Mm.
on. There's loads of videos on like how the TikTok algorithm works or the YouTube algorithm works, but
But they
like
keep
that,
nerfing it for us.
but even then, like even
Yeah.
understanding it doesn't mean that you can work it.
No. No, exactly.
You're still just kind of. I think what we've said here already is that the key thing for discoverability is authenticity.
Yeah.
If you can actually just genuinely be yourself, um, that in itself is a way of finding an audience.
Mm.
People who are like you and like what you create will follow you, and
I mean, I think
that might just be it.
I am going to change that a little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah,
I do think you need to be authentic, but I think we have many aspects of ourselves. We have many things that we have to say in the world.
mm,
But we need to find an audience that is going to connect with what we have to say. So I think we've got to remain authentic, but we've got to focus our authenticity in an angle, in a kind of aspect, in a direction where we know there are willing ears to listen. And I think working out how to frame the stuff that you're passionate is absolutely as important as how you design the game or the material or the narrative. Understanding the frame, the way that we shape our messaging, the way we present our messaging, and where we put that messaging, I think is become just as important as making the game itself.
I think a lot of that comes with confidence. Like this surprises people quite often that I am not a bravado, like outgoing person that I appear to be. Yeah, um, I spent most of my life being fully introverted and
Yeah.
shy and not able to talk to people. Certainly not able to publicly put my face on a podcast. Um, but I think at some point I just kind of realised that it's almost that fake it till you make it mentality. And so, um, as an artist, I would show people my art. Like in the early days, I would show people my art, and they'd be like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's because you don't do art, and so you don't know how terrible it is." But eventually, I was like, "This is not helping me." Like, if I'm trying to, at the time, I was trying to sell my art. I still do sell my art, but yeah, it was very much more direct. I was doing paintings and trying to sell my painting, and so I kind of just flipped it on its head. And when someone said to me, "Oh, this is amazing," I would say, "Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it
You're
is."
right.
And I
Glad to know.
always,
Glad you noticed.
yeah, I always got a bit of a like, "Oh," a bit of a that kind of response.
Yeah.
But I did it playfully enough that it was like a shock, but with a giggle and like, is that's quite nice confidence. Whereas realistically, I was going, I still think it's awful, but at least
Yeah.
if I have this way of selling what I'm doing. So yeah, I like, and also you kind of have to get to the point where you're comfortable with what you're creating, because you are creating it for other people to enjoy. And if someone else is telling you that they enjoy it, then you kind of have to go, cool, thanks, nice. That was what I was trying to do. And
And
I think if
I think
we
there's
can
a lot
do
of
that,
strength in that. I mean, one of the comments I always make, because obviously I'm the opposite. I'm the ultimate extrovert in principle. But even then, even I have these like down times, this lone wolf moments where I just don't want to talk to other people. But I am inherently somebody whose thoughts happen outside their head. So whilst I don't get things like anxiety before going on stage, not particularly, occasionally, very, very rarely, what I get is post-performance anxiety. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's a healthy thing that you understand where your stress processes happen. So for me, my stress happens, did I get that right? Did I do that well enough? Was I effective in what I did? And I think that's a really, whether you're introvert or extrovert, the processes you go through in getting ready to present and taking that framing of mind that you've just described to say, yeah, no, it's okay for me to say I'm good at this. But equally being able to also be able to turn around and say, did I get that right? Did I present that right? And again, why am I saying that? It's not about just us as individuals. The same mindset applies to our game, and going out with confidence with our game and reviewing the data of what actually happened so we can do it better next time, and not looking at something that we do as a one moment, but as a, this is how I'm testing this is how I'm testing that. And I think with this mindset, it makes us more resilient. It makes us able to adjust and move rapidly. And in a place where the market has been maturing, and when it is now moving forward into some new unknown way of operating, it's up to us to be able to move into that space fast. And those of us who do it successfully will have a massive impact on the way the market grows next.
hopefully that's
Hopefully.
hopefully that's exactly, yeah. I think you're right. And it's all, it's all quite the same thing.
Yeah.
If discovery is to be tackled,
Mm.
you indies are going to need to have confidence in what they're doing, have done the homework to have the confidence in what they're doing,
Yeah.
and to just try and just be genuine. Like the whole reason you're making the thing that you're making is because you love the thing that you're making.
Yeah.
If that's not the case, please stop doing it and make the thing that you want to make.
So many years ago, a friend of mine came on. He was at Vodafone, I think, at the time. Was on stage talking about content being king, but distribution is queen. It's kind of a kind of nice kind of way of looking at it. Bit of a joke as well. But the thing about that for me is actually, I think in the end, it's only really discovery that's going to make a difference. And what we have to work out is how do we get there without losing our identity. And I think our identity matters. And to date, we've had to go through the lens of other people's platforms. I'd be interested to see if we can find either who the next platform's going to be, or can we go direct to our audience in ways that are more effective.
I'd love to go direct.
Yeah. And on that note, well, thank you very much, Stuart. It's been great fun chatting. Hopefully, for you guys out there, we've been trying to get across that, we think there's big changes happening in the market that are related to the way the infrastructure works. We think that that affects us as indies in a more disproportionate way than some of the larger organizations, particularly because the gap in skill sets and the gap of kind of understanding is going to be greater for us because there's only smaller numbers of us in any of our groups, whether it's individual or pairs or small teams. Indies tend to have a larger learning curve than some of the larger organizations. But change is inevitable, and change is also our opportunity as smaller organizations. And that is what we need to grasp. So when you're thinking about the game you're going to make, don't just stop there. Think about who you're making that game for, where they are, and how you can connect to them the best way. And if we can do that, we'll be able to be more successful and bring content that people truly care about. Thank you very much. And if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual stuff. And obviously, don't forget the Discord. There is a fantastic Discord. And obviously, you can talk to the likes of me and Stuart and all the other folks involved in the game dev local community. We're there. Please come and join us. And let's have a conversation. If you think we're wrong, tell us. It's much more fun to have a debate about these things than just to assume that we're right. On that note, Stuart, thanks again. And this has been your Game Dev Local.